Imagine you are sitting in a room that feels as cold as the history it was built upon. Across from you sits a man. He is 32 years old, and he is a murderer. You look into his eyes, searching for a flicker of regret, a shadow of shame, or even a spark of anger. But there is nothing. It is like looking into a deep, still well where the water has long since frozen over. You are there to understand the hidden engines of his mind, to find the biological ghost that haunts his lack of conscience. This man is a clinical psychopath. To him, your emotions are a foreign language he can speak but cannot hear. He knows the words of empathy, but he has never heard the music. This is the paradox of the human machine, that we can be biologically identical in almost every way, yet one of us can feel the weight of the world in a single tear, while the other feels absolutely nothing at all. Why is it that some of us are wired for connection while others seem destined for isolation? To understand this, we have to look back at the evolutionary engine that built us. Our ancestors did not survive because they were the strongest or the fastest. They survived because they were the most cooperative. In the harsh landscapes of our deep past, a lone human was a dead human. We needed each other. To facilitate this, evolution hardwired a social radar into our skulls, a tiny, almond-shaped cluster of cells called the amygdala. This organ is the sentinel of the brain. It is responsible for processing fear and, more importantly, for recognizing the distress of others. When you see someone in pain, your amygdala fires, triggering a physical response, a racing heart, a dampness on the skin. This visceral reaction is the foundation of morality. It makes the suffering of another person feel like your own, creating a biological incentive to be kind. In the brain of a psychopath, this sentinel is asleep at the post. Neurologically, the amygdala in these individuals is often smaller and less active than in the average person. When they look at a face twisted in grief, their brain does not send the signal to the heart to beat faster. They perceive the distress intellectually, but they do not feel it. It is a terrifying thought that the difference between a saint and a predator might come down to a few millimeters of gray matter deep within the temporal lobe. This deficit creates a disconnect between the intellect and the instinct. Imagine you are walking through a forest and you see a fallen tree. You recognize it is broken, but you do not feel pity for the wood. For a man like the one in that prison, a human being is often just another fallen tree, an object to be moved or used, but never truly felt. Oh, consider the mundane ways this plays out in your daily life. Think of a time you were exhausted, perhaps walking home after a long day, and you saw a stranger drop their groceries. Even in your fatigue, you felt a slight tug in your chest, a small, annoying urge to help. That is your amygdala whispering to you. Now, shift your focus to a high-stakes systemic example. Imagine a trillion-dollar technology giant designing an algorithm to maximize user engagement. The algorithm has no amygdala. It does not care if the content it promotes causes anxiety, depression, or social upheaval. It only sees the data. When we build systems that prioritize cold efficiency over human impact, we are essentially creating corporate psychopaths, entities that know the words of connection, but are structurally incapable of feeling the music of the human cost. We are surrounded by these unfeeling engines every day, and they shape our world just as surely as the man in the high-security cell. But where does this moral hardware come from? Is it something we are born with? Or is it a skill we must practice? Evolution suggests it is a bit of both. By the time a child is only 6 months old, they can already tell the difference between a living thing and a cold object. By 12 months, they are mimicking the actions of their parents. Imagine you are a toddler watching your mother stretch her arms toward the ceiling. Without thinking, you raise your own tiny hands. You are building the foundations of the social brain. Bit by bit, layer by layer, you are learning to understand the intentions of those around you. By the age of 3 or 4, most children have a sharp, almost innate sense of fairness. If you have ever tried to break a promise to a 4-year-old, you know that their mind is not a blank slate. It is a finely honed tool, a Swiss Army knife of social expectations. There seems to be a window of opportunity in our development. During these early years, the brain is like soft clay, ready to be molded by the environment. If a child is raised in a world of care and consistency, their moral modules sharpen. But what happens if that window is missed? What happens if the environment is one of neglect or extreme stress? The brain is exquisitely sensitive to the world around it. When we are under constant threat, our bodies release stress hormones called glucocorticoids. In high doses, these hormones act like a slow-burning acid on the brain, suppressing the growth of new cells. This creates a tragic feedback loop. More stress leads to less brain development, which leads to less adaptability, which in turn causes even higher levels of stress. For over 100 years, the prevailing wisdom in science was that the adult brain was a static, unchanging thing. The dogma was that once you reached adulthood, your neural pathways were set in stone. No new cells could grow. If you were born with a faulty amygdala or a damaged heart, you were simply out of luck. But in the 1990s, a revolutionary discovery changed everything. Researchers began to find evidence of neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells in the adult mammalian brain. First, they saw it in the areas responsible for smell, then in the centers for memory, and finally, in the amygdala itself. This means that the frozen sea within us can in fact be broken. The brain is not a finished statue. It is a living, breathing landscape that can be replanted and regrown. To understand the power of the environment, imagine two mice. One is kept in a standard cage, a small, barren shoebox with nothing but some cotton wool. It is alone, unstimulated, and bored. Over time, this mouse will stop thriving. It may develop strange, repetitive behaviors and become aggressive toward others. Its brain shows very few new neurons. Now imagine the second mouse. It lives in what researchers call an enriched environment, a large, sprawling habitat filled with other mice, ladders to climb, wheels to run on, and new areas to explore every day. This mouse is social, healthy, and curious. Most importantly, its brain is teeming with new life. Even in adulthood, its amygdala is growing. It hasn't learned to carry groceries for elderly mice, but it has developed the neurological capacity for healthy, social bonding. The irony of our current society is that we take people who have stressed, deficient amygdalae, people who have failed to develop the music of empathy, and we place them in environments that are the human equivalent of that barren shoebox. Our prisons are often designed to be as unstimulating and stressful as possible. We expect people to change and become better citizens, while we keep them in a setting that actively inhibits the growth of the very brain cells they need to function in society. Imprisonment is a necessary part of justice and safety, but we must ask ourselves, are we actually fixing the problem, or are we just making the frozen sea even harder? What if there was another way? What if we could use the brain's capacity for change to our advantage? This is where the concept of restorative justice comes in. Imagine a scenario where a perpetrator is brought face to face with their victim in a safe, structured environment. For the first time, the person who committed the harm cannot look away. They are forced to see the victim not as an object or a statistic, but as a real human being with thoughts, feelings, and a visible emotional response. This encounter is a powerful stimulant for the amygdala. It forces the brain to process the music of another person's pain in a way that no textbook or prison wall ever could. It is not a miracle cure, and it will not work for everyone, but for many, it is the first step toward breaking the cycle of indifference. We have advanced so much as a society in the way we run our schools and our hospitals, yet our view of justice often feels stuck in medieval times. We have allowed ourselves to believe the false notion that human nature is fixed and that some people are simply irredeemable. But the science tells a different story. It tells us that we are capable of extraordinary change way into our adult years. The question is not whether the brain can change, but whether we are willing to create the environments that allow it to happen. This requires an alliance of people from all walks of life: scientists, policymakers, social workers, and citizens, all working together to apply what we know about the human mind to the way we structure our world. There is a final, more personal lesson in all of this. We often think of people like Joe as being fundamentally different from us. But the truth is that we all have an amygdala, and we are all susceptible to the environment around us. We must be careful not to let our own sentinels become hardened. If we view others as wholly irredeemable, we are essentially shutting down our own capacity for empathy. We are choosing to see the world through a cold, indifferent lens. In a decade, the man I met in that prison will be released. He will return to the world. We have to decide if we want him to return as the same person who went in, or as someone who has been given the chance to regrow the connections he was missing. It is in the interest of all of us to ensure that our justice system reflects the reality of our biology. As you go about your day, I invite you to conduct a small audit of your own brain. When you feel a flash of anger or a moment of indifference toward a stranger, ask yourself, what is my amygdala doing right now? Is it awake? Am I hearing the music or just the words? We are all works in progress, navigating a world that often tries to turn us into shoeboxes. But remember, the sea within you is not permanently frozen. It is capable of a great thaw, provided we give it the warmth and the space to move. Follow this series as we continue to dive into the hidden machinery of the mind, uncovering the mysteries of why we do what we do and how we can become who we want to be. The journey into the human brain is the greatest mystery of all, and we are only just beginning to turn the page.